The ocean never keeps secrets forever. It only patiently waits for the right moment to spit out what humans have tried to bury. June 8, 1708, was no ordinary day in the Caribbean. It was the fateful date that wiped out a piece of human history and replaced it with a tragic legend. Imagine standing on the deck of the San José, the marvel of the Spanish fleet. Beneath your feet, the ship groans under the weight of a massive treasure. Its belly is stuffed with silver pieces of 8, gold doubloons, pure silver ingots from and thousands of deep green emeralds from Muso. Today, that haul would be worth $20 billion. But back then, the number was meaningless. It wasn't just wealth. It was the survival of an empire. The King of Spain desperately needed this money to salvage a war back home. The San José wasn't just carrying gold. It was carrying the hope and despair of a dynasty. It was a swimming lifeline. The air on the sea that day was thick with salt and suffocating tension. Captain José Fernández de Santillan stood on the quarterdeck. His face was grim under the dim light, not from gunpowder smoke, but from sheer terror. A man holding the lives of 600 sailors and history's greatest maritime treasure was trembling. Why? Because he knew he was being hunted. The British didn't just want to defeat Spain. They wanted to sever this financial artery. And the hunter was Admiral Charles Vager, an old wolf of the Royal Navy, known for his cold calculation. Spanish arrogance led to a fatal mistake. They believed the firepower of 64 cannons made the San José invincible. They believed luck was on their side. But Vager didn't believe in luck. He believed in gunpowder and systematic brutality. As night fell draping the sea in ink-black darkness, the British fleet began its approach. Picture the sound of destruction starting not with a bang, but with the hiss of cannonballs tearing through the air. The British ship expedition lunged at the San José like a rabid beast. Vager's goal was clear. Capture the ship, do not sink Italiano. He wanted that gold. He wanted the glory of seizing the world's largest treasure. But history has a dark sense of humor. The battle was fought at such close range that sailors could see the wild eyes of their enemies through the muzzle flashes. The deck became a chaotic slaughterhouse. Men fell not just from bullets, but from exhaustion and the violent swaying of the ship. The screams of 600 souls mixed with the sound of splintering wood to create a symphony of hell. Captain Santillan tried to order return fire, but chaos had taken the wheel. The San José's cannons roared, but they could not stop the cold determination of the British. Then came the fatal moment. A stray cannonball, or perhaps a spark born of panic, found its way into the San José's powder magazine. It was the death spot, guarded by its own wealth. Tons of black powder sitting silently next to hundreds of tons of gold were suddenly awakened. The explosion was instant erasure. A massive pillar of fire tore through the night, turning the wooden giant into a million splinters in a heartbeat. The shockwave was so immense that nearby British ships were rocked violently, windows shattered, and sailors were thrown into the sea. In that split second, lives vanished. No final words, no lingering pain, just disappearance. Gold, silver, and jewels. The things they risked their lives to protect, the things kings craved, became nothing more than molten metal sinking 600 meters into the deep. Admiral Vager stood on the deck of the expedition, staring blankly at the empty space where the San José had just been. He didn't feel victory. He felt a terrible loss. $20 billion had just slipped through his fingers, vanishing into the void along with the souls he had just buried. The silence that blanketed the Caribbean after the explosion was scarier than any sound. It was the silence of death. The acrid smell of destruction mixed with gunpowder created a haunting scent that the survivors would never forget. The San José sank, taking the secret of its exact location with it. It lay there, in the cold, dark deep, a mass grave for 600 humans. Gold coins scattered on the sand, silver ingots covered in coral, and emeralds glowing faintly in eternal darkness. They were no longer currency. They became silent witnesses to greed and the cruelty of war. But the story didn't end there. The disappearance of the San José was just the beginning of a curse spanning 3 centuries. This ghost ship still lies there, whispering into the ears of ambitious men generations later. It waits. It knows humans will return, not to visit the lost souls, but to wake the monster of greed once again. And this time, the war won't be fought with cannons and swords, but with legal papers, stock market numbers, and dirty political schemes. The San José is dead, but its ghost is rising stronger than ever, seeping into every loophole of law and the human heart. The treasure at the bottom of the sea has become a ticking time bomb for modern nations. 3 centuries after that fateful night, the silence of the deep-sea grave was shattered. But this time, it wasn't by the roar of cannons or the screams of sailors. This time, the noise came from hypersensitive electronics, from cold sonar pulses sweeping the ocean floor. The hunt for the San José mutated from a romantic adventure into a war of algorithms and finance. In 1981, in a nameless European city, a private consortium called Global Ocean Survey, or G&OS, was born. G&OS was no ordinary salvage company. They were a tangled web of marine scientists, maritime lawyers, and financiers backed by shadowy hedge funds. Their goal was not merely to find the treasure, but to own the information first and weaponize it. Leading G&OS was Elias Thorne, a strategist with a murky past and a very simple philosophy. Money is not the ultimate value. Leverage is everything. Thorne understood that bringing $20 billion of gold to the surface immediately would crash the precious metal market. That was too crude. Instead, if he controlled the information about the location and the timing of the recovery, he could manipulate global financial markets, pressure governance, and sell that soft power to nations hungry for diplomatic influence. In Thorne's hands, the San José treasure would turn into an economic trigger, not just an asset. Thorne spent a decade combing through ancient archives, not looking for coordinates, but for the weakest legal links of Spain and Colombia. He poured millions into deep-sea detection technology, the most advanced side-scan sonar of the time, working quietly under the guise of a fake scientific research project. In 1982, G&OS claimed they had found the wreck of the San José. This announcement wasn't made at a grand press conference, but through a quiet lawsuit filed in U.S. federal courts. They didn't release the coordinates. They only demanded the court recognize their salvage rights under international maritime law. Thorne played a grand chess game. He knew Colombia would react fiercely. And then, the battle would shift from the ocean to the courtroom, where G&OS and its elite legal team held the advantage. He deliberately turned the treasure from a historical mystery into a protracted international civil case. Thorne's patience lasted for over 3 decades. G&OS dominated the narrative around the San José with funded academic papers and discreet lobbying in Washington and Geneva. They succeeded in setting a precedent. Finders keepers. To governments, the San José was a sunken state warship, but to G&OS, it was an abandoned commercial wreck, a crucial legal definition allowing them to salvage it. G&OS's manipulation caused real fear in Bogota. The Colombian government understood that if a private entity controlled the treasure, their national sovereignty and economic security would be severely threatened. An entity that could trigger a currency crisis simply by opening a gold vault was more dangerous than a military fleet. So, the Colombian government decided to break Thorne's hold themselves. They launched a top-secret campaign using naval experts and domestic scientists, equipped with detection technology far superior to what G&OS used in the 80s. The goal was not just to find the San José, but to find it again in a way that was indisputable. On the night of November 27, 2015, after years of working in the shadows, the Colombian Navy's autonomous submarine captured undeniable images. A bronze cannon engraved with dolphins, a symbol of Spain, and above all, gold and silver coins scattered on the seabed, covered in coral. The location was unique and had never been published. The official announcement from the Colombian president rang out like a thunderclap to G&OS and Thorne's investors. Colombia declared absolute sovereignty, defining the San José as national cultural heritage, impossible to salvage for commercial purposes. This legal maneuver dealt a fatal blow to G&OS's strategy. Thorne's entire soft power plan based on commercial salvage rights collapsed. He lost his only advantage, the primacy of being the first finder. But Elias Thorne was not a man to give up easily. He didn't care about photos of cannons or emeralds. He only cared about violated clauses and signed contracts. He knew that as long as the wreck lay down there, the war was not over. Colombia's decision only changed the playing field from a science lab to the global political stage and the Supreme Court. The ghost of the San José, awakened by technology in 19, had now found a new host. Governments, international law firms, and faceless financial manipulators. The greed of 600 sailors sank with the ship, but the greed of millions, fed by technology and law, had now been unleashed. The real war, the coldest and most immoral war, was only just beginning. In 2015, when the president of Colombia announced the discovery of the San José, the world didn't cheer. It started calculating a starting gun had fired, not to begin a regatta, but to launch the most brutal legal scramble in maritime history. The grave of 600 sailors instantly turned into a giant slice of cake placed right in the middle of a banquet for international vultures. We are entering a phase where morality is stripped away entirely, leaving only cold legal Three major powers began charging at each other in a suffocating standoff. In the first corner sits Spain. They immediately invoked the concept of sovereign immunity. To Madrid, the San José is still a Royal Navy warship, a sacred military cemetery protected by UNESCO conventions. Their argument is steely. No one has the right to violate the graves of Spanish soldiers. And more importantly, that gold is national property that was never abandoned. They view Colombia's actions as no different than digging up someone else's ancestral grave to steal the jewelry. In the second corner are G&OS and American investors. They don't care about history or cemeteries, they only care about contracts. They sued Colombia at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, demanding $10 billion have, the treasurer's value based on the U.S.-Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement. To them, the San José is a venture capital project that has reached maturity, and Colombia's unilateral claim of ownership is blatant corporate asset seizure. And in the third corner is Colombia. They hold the most important trump card location. The wreck lies in their territorial waters. The Colombian government quickly passed the Submerged Cultural Heritage Act, a clever legal move allowing them to classify artifacts. Items deemed repetitive, like millions of gold coins, could be considered commercial assets to pay for salvage costs, while unique items would go to museums. In other words, they found a legal way to sell national treasure. But this war has a fourth player, a faint voice carrying terrible moral weight, often ignored by the media. It is the Cara indigenous community of Bolivia. They stood up and declared that the silver and gold on that ship belonged neither to Spain nor Colombia. It is the blood and tears of their ancestors who were enslaved and died in the Potosi mines to mint those silver ingots. To the Cara, salvaging the ship isn't archaeology. It is the continuation of colonial looting after 300 years. Their accusation turned an economic dispute into a verdict of conscience, who actually owns what was stolen. However, the gears of greed never stop for conscience. From 2015 to 2023, the war was fought mostly on paper. Lawyers battled with diplomatic notes while the ship lay silent on the seabed, suffering corrosion from salt water and bacteria. Experts warned that without quick action, the wooden hull would collapse completely, burying everything forever. Time pressure forced the Colombian government to make a bold decision. In early 2024, an unprecedented campaign was launched. Colombia declared it would no longer wait for international consensus. They would unilaterally proceed with the first phase, intrusive exploration. The goal was not to bring the whole ship up, but to retrieve the first samples to prove capability and assert sovereignty. In May 2024, the research vessel Arcoribe of the Colombian Navy dropped anchor right above the grave. This time, it wasn't just blurry sonar images. A remote-controlled robot, equipped with mechanical arms as precise as a surgeon's, began its descent. 600 meters of black water were pierced by high-power floodlights. Imagine the moment the robotic arm touched the sediment. After sleeping for over 3 centuries, the dust of time was stirred. Cameras beamed live images to the control room, where officials and scientists held their breath. What they saw was both magnificent and haunting. Most green bronze cannons still sat proudly. Sets of Chinese ceramics remained astonishingly intact, as if just set out for a tea party that never happened. And of course, the gold coins scattered, glittering under the artificial light, a deadly and mesmerizing beauty. But this act was not just archaeology, it was a steely, political statement. When the robot clamped onto a ceramic jar and a coin to bring them to the surface, Colombia officially broke the seal of the tomb. They crossed a red line. From the moment the first artifact left the water and touched the air, the abstract legal dispute turned into a concrete material struggle. It was no longer theory. The treasure was real. It was on the lab table, and everyone wanted their cut. This pilot salvage operation was like throwing a chunk of fresh meat to a school of starving sharks. Spain immediately objected fiercely, threatening to cut cultural diplomatic ties. G&OS accelerated their litigation, demanding a freeze on Colombia's international assets. The Cara watched in pain as their ancestors' legacy was dragged up like exhibition items. 2025 arrived with a suffocating atmosphere. Colombia, under domestic economic pressure and a desire to turn the San José into a new symbol of power, began gearing up for Phase 2. Large-scale salvage. They called it a scientific mission, but the world called it the biggest legalized grave robbery of the 21st century. Giant cranes were mobilized. Ultra-durable steel mesh systems were designed. Humanity was preparing to rudely intervene in the ocean's millennial sleep. They didn't know that lifting 200 tons of precious metal from the water wasn't just a technical issue. It was opening a Pandora's box. Inside that box was not just gold, but economic, political, and spiritual consequences that no supercomputer could fully predict. When the first artifacts were cleaned and displayed, their shine didn't bring joy. It brought division. The San José, from a historical tragedy, had become a mirror reflecting the insatiable greed of the modern world. Are we ready to wake the real monster? The answer lies in what happens when the first block of gold touches the sunlight. The world had held its breath for this moment for 3 centuries. On the day the large-scale salvage operation officially began, the sky over the Caribbean turned a grayish hue, as if signaling an omen. Dozens of escort ships, naval vessels, and massive barges surrounded the coordinates of death, turning the empty sea into a noisy industrial construction site. Giant cranes stretched their steel arms out to sea, looking like machines waiting to dismantle the wreck of a giant beast. When the winch system began to turn, pulling ultra-durable cables deep into the ocean, no one said a word. The only sounds were the groaning engines and the waves lapping against the hulls. 600 meters below, the San José, or rather what was left of it, was being ripped from the sediment that had embraced it for 300 years. Eternal rest was being rudely violated in the name of science and national interest. And then it appeared. The first debris to break the surface was not an intact ship like in the movies. It was a chaotic mess of rotten wood, mud, coral, and metal. Marine experts watched in horror, covering their mouths as a pungent smell of sulfur and ancient decay instantly filled the air. As the water drained away, the oxygen-starved timbers, preserved by the crushing pressure of the deep, began to shrink and crackle loudly, sounding like breaking bones. It was chemical destruction. By exposing the hull to the tropical air without years of chemical stabilization, the salvagers were not saving the ship. They were destroying it. The structure that had survived explosions and centuries of currents was disintegrating into dust in mere minutes. Scientists screamed at the crane operators to stop, but it was too late. 1,000 years of maritime history was being traded for a pile of meltable metal. But as hypersonic water jets began to wash away the black mud, that mesmerizing light was revealed. Gold, gold everywhere. Rectangular gold bars, gold coins, shining as if minted yesterday. The tropical sun hit them, creating blinding reflections, but that light offered no warmth. It was cold and sharp. In that moment, all ideals of heritage preservation or historical research vanished. In the eyes of officials, investors, and even the soldiers standing guard, only one thing remained. Craving. The monster of greed had officially been released from its saltwater cage. But as soon as the first treasure containers were moved to a secure vault on land, the curse of the San José began to manifest. It wasn't ghosts or plagues, but a modern curse, far more practical and brutal, social and economic chaos. News of the successful salvage traveled faster than light. People poured into the streets of Bogota and Cartagena to celebrate, believing their country had just won the lottery, that public debt would be erased, that poverty would end. But that euphoria quickly turned into rage. When the government announced that the funds would be locked in a trust, riots exploded. Thousands of protesters clashed with police, holding placards that read "Our gold, our bread." Tear gas filled the plazas, where people once danced. Political factions began fiercely competing over the rights to distribute the unsold money. From a symbol of pride, the San José turned into a fuse for civil unrest. The country was deeply divided by the very asset it had just found. On the international front, the consequences were catastrophic. The International Court of Arbitration immediately ordered a freeze on all salvaged assets, following an emergency request from G&OS and the Spanish government. The $20 billion treasure instantly became a toxic asset. No reputable auction house dared to touch it. No major museum dared to borrow it for a display for fear of legal trouble. The ripple effect devastated the niche world of high-stakes treasure hunting. Insurance giants in London and New York immediately suspended coverage for underwater exploration projects. The precedent was terrifying. If a government could nationalize a discovery retroactively, no private investment was safe. The stock prices of marine salvage firms crashed overnight. Economists coined a new term: the San José effect, an asset so valuable, it bankrupts its owner. Furthermore, releasing a massive amount of emeralds and ancient silver into the market sent a shockwave through the financial world. Collectors panic-sold existing collections for fear of devaluation, causing the antiquities market to wobble. The value of the San José treasure itself began to evaporate before it was even sold. The so-called $20 billion was just a number on paper. In reality, it was a massive liability, with preservation, security, and legal costs amounting to millions of dollars a day. Meanwhile, the Caracara indigenous community watched quietly from afar. They did not join the scramble. They had warned of this. To them, Waking the San José was like opening an old wound that had never healed. They saw history repeating itself, gold and silver once again bringing division and suffering, just like 300 years ago. The curse lies not in ghosts, but in the unchanging nature of humans. We always want to possess things that do not belong to us. Finally, after years of arguing, the fate of the San José treasure remains suspended in limbo. It sits silently in heavily guarded vaults, dust settling on gold coins. It brought wealth to no one. It built no schools or hospitals. It only enriched law firms and fed diplomatic hatred. The story of the San José ends not with a glorious victory, but with a bitter truth. The real treasure is not gold or gems. The real treasure is the history lesson we ignored. We destroyed a priceless archaeological site, a sacred resting place, just to exchange it for soulless lumps of metal that divide humanity. The ocean returned the San José, but it also took away the peace of those who dared to steal it. As night falls on the harbor where the treasure is kept, one can still feel a chilling cold. Perhaps Admiral Charles Vidger was lucky not to capture the ship all those years ago. Perhaps the San José should have stayed forever at the bottom of the deep sea, the only place where human greed could not tarnish its tragic beauty. Because there are doors that, once opened, can never be closed again.